The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of their institutions, employers, or affiliates. This content is for informational and discussion purposes only and should not be taken as official policy, guidance, or advice. Welcome to episode 1 of our AI on the Quad podcast, where we talk with interesting people about how AI is impacting and transforming education. I'm your co host, Phil Spitzy.
And I am your co-host, Andy Tynes. We are excited to welcome Joe Sabato to this initial podcast that we're very excited about having today. Joe, for the audience who may not know you, can you please just give us an overview of your current role and what all that entails?
Sure, Phil and Andy. Wow, what a privilege! The first episode, and for being the guest for that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I don't know what you saw in my profile on LinkedIn thing that gave me this privilege of being the first guest, but no, thank you. So, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, folks. I'm Joe Sabato. I'm the Deputy CIO at UC Santa Barbara. I'm a proud UCSB alum and a first generation college graduate. I lead a team of 65 managing our student information systems, financial systems, data services, and business analysis, application development. So my current priorities are we have this new financial management modernization initiative that we just completed, the Student Success Hub, which is a modernization of our advising system. And I also lead the campus data governance with a strong focus on student success data. I also co-direct the UCSB AI Community of Practice, member of the UC AI Council, and a co-leader in the EDUCAUSE AI community. And I mention all of these just to give a sense of where my perspective is coming from when it comes to AI in higher education. But really, my passion is about helping students succeed. And I've been at UCSB for the last, almost 30 years. I've been working quite a bit with marginalized folks and kind of being a mentor and a possibility model to them. And so that really drives the way I look at technology with respect to social justice, equity, and how we can help students succeed. And for me, when I talk about student success, we also have to keep in mind the success and well-being of the faculty and staff that enable student success. Often that's forgotten sometimes when we talk about student success, but really when we talk about AI, which is the topic of this conversation, we have to look at the entire flourishing and well-being of our entire community.
That's hugely important and actually, kind of sets the scene for kind of our first round of discussion around obviously, by all appearances, AI is the disruptor of the age, for this generation of students by far. What are you seeing in terms of adoption and trends and feedback as it's coming from both sides, from the student perspective as well as from the faculty and maybe even, with your role, the administration side of things?
Sure, that's a great question, and that's been the theme that's been emerging from landscape studies, like EDUCAUSE, they had a landscape study this year, several reports as well in higher education, and of course, my conversation with students, faculty, my campus, UC and EDUCAUSE. It's interesting that while faculty and students are actually looking at the same issues, just from a different side, right? So for example, they're just as interested in making sure that there's a clear policy and guidelines. And I had a conversation with a consultant, maybe last week, who wanted to collaborate with me, and her concern was in helping a state system say faculties are just doing things on their own, and a lot of them don't even know how to get started. It's overwhelming, right? So there's a need for faculty to be aware, be informed of the policies, and also the competency to use AI responsibly. So they're just as curious and they're just also interested in that. At the same time, students also want clear policies and guidelines. As it is, because the faculty have a lot of freedom inside the classroom, some faculty, accept the use of AI, endorse the use of AI. In some cases, not at all, right? In some cases, in between. So that's one thing that I think is emerging is students and faculty are looking at the same issues, same themes, maybe from a different perspective. The other one, of course, is academic integrity and ethics. There's a sense, I think the common narrative when ChatGPT came about 2022, 23, is this cheating, AI and cheating. That was the major conversation. I think we've kind of moved away a little bit from that. But again, students that I speak with, they're just as concerned about making sure that they're getting the right education, that their peers are also practicing academic integrity. So the whole narrative of like, well, students just all cheat. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, just like before AI, there are some students that take advantage of the system, but at the same time, what I'm hearing from students is they also want fairness. They also want to make sure that, the entire class and themselves are going through the education experience because they said that they pay for it and they want to be ready for the workforce.
That's
Well, I mean,
refreshing to hear.
Yeah,
if you think about it, it is in effect, it's a new frontier, right? So a lot of unknowns out there for both the faculty and the students. And if the students are seeing inconsistencies from class to class, that's only going to make them more anxious and unsure, what to do moving forward. So I think you're on the right, you're going in the right path in terms of trying to establish, you know, clear direction and guidance. And that kind of leads us to our second topic. From your perspective, how is institutional strategy around AI developing across the higher ed landscape? I'm guessing it can change from one school to the next, but we're very interested in hearing what you're hearing from your peers.
absolutely. And this is empirical evidence that, firsthand knowledge because I speak with quite a bit of people in higher education. Um, One of the events that I spoke at, it was invited to speak, is this EDUCAUSE AI Summit sometime, I think in the spring quarter, or might have been early summer. What emerged from the conversation is that every campus is going through its own journey, right? And so there are, depending, it doesn't matter what institutional size it is or classification. Every campus, because of its culture, because of its risk aversion, because of leadership, um, or capacity, they have their own journey. So when you talk about strategy, it's pretty much all over the place. Some campuses are just still trying to figure it out. Some are already ahead. But the way strategies plays out is also very interesting because there are some campuses that have like a high campus level task force. It's typically headed by, the provost and maybe in partnership with the CIO in academics. But there are also some that are just basically kind of homegrown, I'm like, grassroots. So what I'm seeing is there's maybe a couple of mandated policies. And when I say policies, you got to follow this, right? Like security. But beyond that, it's all guidelines. We spoke about like the classroom experience, they're guidelines. So faculty can implement those kind of, guidelines the way they want to. So academic integrity is one of them that's policy, but also security. In some campuses, they've developed a new AI policy. In some cases, like ASU, they said we didn't need to because we already have academic integrity. And that's what actually helped them lead, I think, as early adopters when they signed on with OpenAI maybe a couple of years ago. But even then, they already had different LLMs that people don't know they already had.
Right, right. That actually it matches a lot of the sentiment that I found. I recently completed a micro credential course through EDUCAUSE about teaching with AI.
Yeah.
And I was the black sheep in the room because I'm not an instructor currently anyway. But all of the educators who were in my cohort were saying a lot of what you just said, which is we want to use it, we want to understand how to use it, but we've not heard from the top down what we're allowed to do,
Right.
right? So I think there's that, and that matches to what you were hearing from the students there, that they just want to know, like, what are the guidelines, like you said, or what are the boundaries of the sandbox? What can we do? What shouldn't we do? Why shouldn't we do certain things? And obviously, with speaking to privacy, that all matches. Um, are you one of the things that they taught in this course was coming up with a usage framework either by course or by assignment, kind of using a stoplight system, right? Red light, green light, yellow light, to help students just understand these are the ways, or this is how far you can go for this assignment or for this course. Are you finding that that's pretty common?
I think so. I mean, I don't know how common it is, but I certainly, when I did an analysis of more than 300 campuses, which is on my Campus AI Exchange website, I did see the kind of framing. Some are clearer than others, right? There's some where they say it's red, yellow, green. As simple as that. Don't use it. You want use it, but you have to attribute it, right? And the other one's like, yeah, go ahead and just use it. Make sure that we're using it. Again, the way that is operationalized varies per campus. Some are straight to the point, some are maybe kind of murky. Because again, campuses are probably still trying to figure out what is the right framing and usage of AI.
Well, even with policies that are in place, it'll be interesting to see the adoption rate from faculty, because I'm
Yeah,
sure that's going to vary as well. Some are going to be good soldiers, go in line with the policies.
yeah.
Others maybe not so much. They'll point to academic freedom and say, well, I'm not ready to go down this path yet. I'm not sure. What are you seeing and hearing?
I'm a little bit more, I'm more on this empathetic side, or I should say sympathetic side. I'm kind of drilling there because I have taught, first year education courses, and I do consider myself educator, but I'm limited to the experience that our faculty has right now. They have, I've heard faculty just kind of get frustrated the fact that they mean well, but the students are unfortunately using ChatGPT or Gen AI to go around some of their assessments. And so for them, it's also a journey to make sense of how to use AI. And so for me, I'm more on that side of empathy because when I was asked by a consultant to say, and the consultant I was talking about, I went when she said that, I said immediately went to the point where like, well, what can we do to support our faculty? And I'm actually doing a research right now on faculty awareness, policy awareness, and implementation. For one, not all campuses in higher education in the United States have clear strategy, or even they have strategy or policy guidelines. And for those that do, the number of faculty that actually are even aware those policies and guidelines exist is not very high. That's a consistent finding in the several reports, landscape studies that I've kind of studied recently.
Is that across both full-time and adjunct faculty? Because I can make that case on the adjunct side pretty easily, right?
Yeah. No, I think
So,
it's in general.
okay.
Yeah.
And do you suspect that it's just lack of communication?
It's more than that. And I think this is where the framework that I created that has different pillars, I think we're going to talk about that later on, has to come into play. There has to be a structure, that accounts for the different layers of principles. How do we make that responsible AI operationalizing those principles, and then making sure there's accountability, and then towards trustworthy AI, I call it. But there's got to be some mechanisms for folks to understand what those policies are, and then also inform the policy going up.
So let's not wait till later. Listen, let's cover that now because I think it really is interesting, and I think it's something that from that class that I enrolled in, it sounds like it's a definite need, right?
Yes.
So we'll have a link at the end to your site, the Campus AI Exchange site. But go ahead and talk more about the framework and kind of the way to approach it as a strategy tool.
Yeah, and so this framework that I created was based on me trying to make sense of all these seemingly overwhelming concepts of AI, right? There's the strategic leadership part of it, there's a change management, there's strategy, how do you actually operationalize it? I'm the deputy CIO on my campus, so I do get the sense of the enterprise. And I speak with a lot of students and faculty and colleagues. So to me, I had to make sense of all these conversations. And that's how I created this framework. And it's two parts. One is the pillars, and there's 8 of them. I can talk, I'll elaborate on those later on. There's also the process. I call it strategic compass. So how do you identify? How do you select? How do you prioritize, this initiative based on different rubrics, right? So strategic fit, ethical, legal, and compliance, financial viability, operational efficiency and innovation, and stakeholder impact. It's to me, my observation is that when folks procure products or develop products on their own in AI, what I find is one or more of these conversations aren't happening, or these assessments are happening. In a risk averse campus, the focus may be on risk, but not so much on maybe on the strategic fit or ethics. It depends on who's at the table. And so to me, I developed this framework to kind of provide that sense of like we got to get the people at the table, including students, by the way. So that's the strategic compass. That's the process. But as far as the pillars, it's one, you got to start with the vision, right? Campus mission and vision. And then AI principles, human dignity, fairness, transparency, policies and guidelines. Some of them may already exist, some not, right? And then of course you got to have governance, risk and compliance component of that. And then the AI engagement and collaboration. This is the community, like for example, at UCSB, we have AI community of practice. And we just had our kickoff today, attended by more than 100 folks, faculty, staff, and some students. Literacy and citizenship. That's another big thing that's coming, by the way, is the need for have AI literacy. The teaching and learning curriculum space. The conversations going on there. Of course, in a partnership as well with external partners, right? Companies. There's also an element of campus readiness. And that's a little bit hard to, I mean, in some ways you can quantify that, you can measure that with maturity and readiness assessments. But really it's about leadership, it's about culture. It's about what is the campus willing to engage with AI right now. Roles and responsibilities. Do people know who to contact, who's accountable at the strategic level, at the change management level, operational level? And then of course, the foundation of all this is implementation, right? And that's where I think, depending on where your campus is, they may focus on one or more of these principles, or these pillars. What I'll tell you is even the ones that you typically see on the news, as an exemplar of a good AI implementation. When I've spoken with them, they're like, "Yeah, we're good at tools, but I think we're missing the AI literacy part."
It seems like it's a very broad and deep, right, approach that has to be looked at. And it sounds like there's that kind of dovetailing between the pillars and the compass that you've just described to make sure you kind of don't miss any gaps. I'm curious, has there been something similar in the past that campuses will have gone through that they can look back at just for some comfort, just for some direction, cues from the past, right? We went through something similar when we did blank. Anything that comes to mind there?
Absolutely. I mean, when campus have gone through many implementation of ERP systems, right? Enterprise level implementations, learning management system, student information systems. As a matter of fact, my latest blog actually wrote about that, where the adoption does require us to look at this enterprise level thinking. Change management, of course, applies. Enterprise architecture applies, right? Capability modeling, business capability modeling, project management, financial management. Those are all disciplines that we can use to advance AI. It's not like it's not new in that sense. So we do have the knowledge, and the question is, how do we modify that a little bit?
Right.
The uniqueness of AI.
Lots of
Right.
moving
So
parts.
it's not, it just seems new. right? I think the kind of the sparkle, if you will, of AI has got people stumped when in reality they probably have a good knowledge base to draw from, right?
Absolutely. Oh, Andy, you were about to say something?
Oh, I was just saying, everything that's involved, there's just a lot of moving parts. And
Yes.
like anything else, it's going to take time. Things will be done that you find out, well, that didn't work so well, so we got to make changes to this, and you'll make adjustments, etc. It's an interesting time for sure. And AI, things move so quickly with AI, it makes it even more of a challenge.
That's right. And I think this is where we talked about strategy earlier. One strategy that some campus use are pilot projects. And I think it's important that the hands-on experience, right, to get feedback. Because we can talk a lot about policies and guidelines, what to do, what not to do. But I think until our community folks are using the product itself, it's just concepts. And that, getting products to our campus is a challenge in itself, right? Because again, the risk aversion, uh, what's the ethical considerations, financial viability. So even that is consideration in getting products that people can use so that we can then be informed about policies and guidelines and what not to do and what to do. It's a cycle.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I see that. I see it. Yeah, it's very much there's a feedback loop, right? So if you start with a pilot in a course, a single class even, there's that feedback loop hopefully occurring of we're going to start with this framework. How did it work for you, professor? How did it work for you, students?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now let's iterate. Okay, now let's next semester, let's try another class. You've got also different subject areas that where it's going to play differently. It's also modalities on campus versus online. So there's a lot of there's a lot of iteration I think that will likely have to occur. And one thing I think that's really great being in the higher ed community in general is that it's very collaborative.
Yes.
So while every campus is on their own journey, like you said, there's a ton of information out there to pull from and to borrow from and to adopt or discard as they see fit, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason why I openly, I don't charge for this framework, the use of it. It's like, here, use it. And as a matter of fact, I will credit, some folks who say, you know what, Joe, maybe I want to tweak this a little bit. So this framework wasn't just developed by me, it's developed through feedback, by well-meaning folks. Or some people meet at the conference like, Joe, I never told you this, but we've actually been using your framework. And by the way, as we went through it, maybe you could add something like this, right, to make it more practical, which really
Nice.
it's pretty cool to hear, right? So, yeah, I mean, I'm learning in public. People are providing me feedback in public, and that's what higher education is. That's why I love building communities or being part of communities.
That's
Makes sense.
awesome.
That's great. Yes.
So I think we've talked a lot about um, kind of policy and frameworks. I think Andy, there's a question there about what else. What yeah, so what else, or I guess what other considerations or moving parts do campuses need to consider um, really to start thinking, and like you said, they're all on their own journey, so they might not be there yet, but with the end goal likely being adoption at campus scale.
Mhm.
So we've talked about strategy, governance, we've talked about frameworks, pilots, et cetera. Is there anything else that you can think of that will help inform a campus on that journey?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And maybe just recently, but I've been thinking about this for a while, that AI really is a leadership imperative. It has to be a leadership imperative because if you think about like a campus, there's so many different stakeholders, right? And all of them have different values, different perspectives. And so our role as what I consider responsible leaders, which is a concept about stakeholder theory and making sure that those different values and stakeholders are represented, is part of us to kind of not consensus really, because you're never going to get to the consensus, but how do you the tensions, how to manage this tension, I guess, reconcile, right? It's always like, this or that. Do we go with AI? Do we provide AI services now, even though we don't have it all figured out yet? One campus may go around that way. The other one could be saying, no, it's too dangerous. We got to make sure that we have our guidelines and policies right in place before we do that. Each one of them have different, pros and cons. Because, for example, we know that our students and the community are using AI, but they're probably using public AI if the campus
Right.
does not provide them. And those free services is not free. Those
Right.
companies are using the data to train the model.
Yep.
Sure. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, there's a great saying in the world of apps, right? If you're not paying for the app, you're the product.
Yep. Yep.
Well, and Phil, you mentioned this earlier, even if you've got policies in place at the campus level, at the discipline level, the experience, the needs, how you use it can really vary from one to the next. So what's being done or what needs to be done or managed in the English department, for example, could be very different than computer science or sociology or, statistical analysis.
It's pretty cool you say that, Andy, because I had a lunch with a student the other day, and he's a data science major, right? He's also taking some general education classes, and in his data science courses, he is encouraged to use AI, for his coding and for his materials. On the other hand, on the writing GEs, he's not allowed to.
Yeah. Not a
So
surprise.
yeah, so there's that nuance I think that you point out, Andy, that I don't think is even talked about. Is yes, there's this learning and teaching pedagogical conversation consideration, but different disciplines, how do those play out?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of it is we don't know what we don't know.
That's right.
And it's going to vary from one discipline to the next. And I think at the end of the day, people need to remember that perfect is the enemy of good. And so doing nothing is not ideal. You're going to make mistakes, so move forward, and that's the only way to make progress.
Right. And I think there's a shift that I've seen the last couple of years. Maybe it's anecdotal, but there's at one point in time where I hear faculty saying AI is going to go away. And I think folks were holding on to the idea. I don't see or read that kind of sentiment as much anymore. It's more like, how do we responsibly use AI now? It's here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I went into that EDUCAUSE course fully expecting it to be a 50-50 split of I'm never going to use it and I'm always going to use it, right? Or I'm going to embrace it. And I've noticed that same kind of shift even in the last 12 to 18 months, right? I think the walls have come down, or at least have started to come down, and people are definitely more open to the idea of incorporating it into curriculum. But again, they want a little bit of guidance, what makes sense. I think, that point that you just raised about free AI, quote unquote, or public AI is very, very different from a privacy standpoint than an agreement that a campus may have with a provider,
That's right.
which is huge. Yeah.
Just to add to that, in terms of how things have changed, Phil and I were both in education technology roles, so we have a lot of conversations with schools, universities around the world, really, but especially in North America. And I think of the probably 50 to 75 conversations that I know I've had so far, I think only one time have I heard someone say, we're not ready to have that discussion. Everybody else is, they recognize that okay, we got to figure something out here. We got to take this on, and we've got to understand it and figure out what is best to do for our campus or for, our discipline, whatever. It can vary from, of course, and we hear lots of different opinions, as you can imagine.
And I think that's where the whole responsible leadership concept comes in, right? There's different value systems, there's different perspectives from different stakeholders. So the question is, how do you get those represented in the conversation? I think that's the only way I can see us moving forward. Is it's going to be a little bit slower, but it has to be deliberate in making sure that those folks who are impacted by AI and those delivering AI need to have a common set of conversations, even common set of
Right.
language. And it has to be, in some cases, it's top down, bottom up, a combination of all those.
So to expand on what Andy just said, we both have long running careers in ed tech, in kind of end user computing space, and products. So one of the things that we're keeping an eye on is how are institutions approaching the adoption of AI enabled tools, products, platforms. I'm sure the answer is not yet, but what are some of the common check boxes that you expect to see or are already seeing as campus evaluate these tools? Because obviously the market's full of them right now, right? And it's probably going to continue to grow.
Of course, one of them is the need, right? So, and depending on, for example, there may be a faculty who says that chatbot actually could help my class. So it could be at that individual level. So they'll buy a product on their own, right or right or wrong, they will go and buy that. But in general, I think part of the procurement process is risk assessment, right? It's centered around security and data privacy and indemnification. So if something goes wrong, what is what's the institution's recourse if that happens? Second one is data residency,
Yep.
right? Where is our data being stored? It's confidential. There are some maybe federal mandates or state mandates or system mandates that says we cannot store data, sensitive data outside the United States. And the last one, of course, again, is that the whole isolation of data to make sure that we do own that. That's one. The other thing too is I think because AI is moving so fast, how do you balance the need to have a stable, partnership? On the other hand, you don't want to get locked in.
Right.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, kind of given your position and your depth of experience already with AI, I'm sure you get exposure to lots of different tools, applications, etc. Have you come across any one or two AI tool sets that when you've looked at them, you've thought to yourself, okay, that one or those two or three, they could have a lot of impact.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to name companies here because I don't introduce a
Yeah.
sense of bias, but conceptually, agentic AI,
Mm.
Okay.
which autonomous agents that can have one prompt and it will decide on its own what's it going to do, right? And so that introduces a lot of possibilities and also challenges, transparency, logic in the model that they're using, and just knowing what are the guardrails in getting implemented. So it's a pretty exciting time. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be a speaker at the Agentic AI and Student Experience Conference at ASU next week, right? And that's based on that. And I'm looking at the agenda, and folks are coming at this from all over the place, right? Inside the classroom, student success. There's a session from Australia, and they're talking about the importance of the first 100 days when students come in, and how can agentic AI be used to make sure that the marginalized students, first gen students, the experience coming to campus is one that's equitable and that promotes student success.
That's a fantastic point, and reminds me of a story my wife told me. She works at a pretty big institution here in Ohio, and they launched a chatbot, right, to interact with students, and what are the cafeteria hours, right? Those kinds of questions and information, but they modeled it after the school's mascots, who are beloved.
Mhm.
And so the students, after a few months of data collection, by and large, the the biggest kind of data use was just saying good morning to the mascot and getting, hope you have a great day, right? You're going to do great today, right? Just that little bit of boost for the to start the day. And they're leaning into it. They're sticking with it, which I think is fantastic.
You
So
know,
there's all like Andy said earlier, we don't know what we don't know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm sure the committee that implemented that never in a million years had that on their radar, that was going to be the primary use, right?
You introduced something that's really important. Companionship AI.
Yeah.
I mean, whether we like it or not, I think more and more people. There was one study, might have been this year, that says companionship is number one use of AI. And so whether institutions, acknowledge it or not, the fact of the matter is the community are going to AI to get something that they probably don't get from the university. I mean, I
Yeah.
had a conversation with a student to say, they call me Uncle Joe here at USSB. It's like TT Joe, right? They're like, um, our counseling centers are really great, but there are times, and they provide CBT, type of counseling, but there are times where I cannot go in because it's my class, or 2 o'clock in the morning. I just need someone or something to feel like I'm listened to.
Yep.
Again, though, I mean, there's so many layers in that, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the matter is, the reality is that students using it to fulfill a need.
Yep.
And it's like anything else, the companionship AI, we've all heard the stories, both good and bad. And it's like anything else. It matters how do you use it. Anything can be used for good, anything can be used for bad. And
Yeah,
as long as you don't lean in too far with it, I guess is kind of maybe the best way to describe it. There's a lot of good out of it because there's a lot of value that those tools can provide and help, whether it's a student or a professor or an analyst working for a Fortune 500 company, help them advance their daily agenda.
that's right. And to me, this is where I think my experience in student affairs comes into play. This concept of learning happens everywhere, right? Not just inside the classroom. Life happens everywhere, not just inside the classroom. And so we start looking at from that lens of how AI is used. It's emotional, psychological, that they'll ask AI for anything and everything that again they can't find um, from the campus.
That
Yeah.
makes sense. I mean, I know I, for one, when I look back on my university days, which was more than a few years ago, but what I learned, a lot of what I learned was outside of the
That's
classroom,
right.
just
That's
in
right.
discussion with my peers,
That's right.
colleagues, professors, etc. Didn't have anything to do with the classes.
That's right. And as a matter of fact, another framework that I created based on again my experience in working with students is this idea of personal success narrative. So institutions have their own notion and metrics of student success. Traditional, GPA, time to graduation, retention, uh, things like that, right? But I wanted to extend that to what I call personal success narrative. Every single person in the university, staff, faculty, and students have their own definition of success. And that's driven by their origin. They have a history, right? Where are they in their journey of becoming, right? I remember as a student, the first year student, that was a lot different than when I graduated. How about the sense of agency in time? We expect our transfer students to acclimate to our campus the same way we do with first year students. That's a little difficult. How about the environment, right? Are the policy systems, the culture in place to be accepting or promoting sense of belonging? And of course, their aspirations.
Sure.
I love that. We may need to do a whole nother episode just on that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We could go for another hour just on that, right?
Yeah.
I meant, like I said, I mentioned that because it kind of gives you a sense of how I'm looking at AI. It can be good, or like you said, Andy, responsibly, irresponsibly. It could be good, used for good, or it could be something not so good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, all very good food for thought. We are going to conclude our very first episode, and a huge thank you to Uncle Joe Sabato. We super enjoyed the time with you and appreciate that. So I'll close this out. This has been the AI on the Quad podcast. And until next time.
Class is dismissed.